Welcome to Human Resources and Payroll Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 training. Today we're going to cover a variety of topics on Human Resources and Payroll in Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013. My name is Terry Healy and I'm an Escalation Engineer at Microsoft. What is nice about the Escalation Engineer role is variety. I get to mentor new engineers. I also get to do training as I'm doing for you today. I also go on site and train customers to get them ramped up on Human Resources and Payroll. Today we have a variety of course topics that we are going to cover. I have arranged them in an order to help you set up your Human Resources and Payroll. The first topic will be HR and Payroll setup. We will create an employee and cover all the different options you need to set up for your HR and Payroll for your employee. We will actually run through a payroll process so you can see step by step how to process a payroll. Last, we will cover year-end, different utilities, reconcile, and reporting. The expectations for today's course is to be used for potential new customers or partners that are trying to learn about Human Resources and Payroll. And also, if you have a new employee that comes to your company, watching this video would be a good training for them to be familiar with the product to help them learn. Our first module setup will be Human Resources and Payroll setup. The module overview will be the organization and posting setup windows. We will also talk about taxes and unemployment setup, workers' comp, your different pay codes, deductions, and benefits setup. I will also show you how to set up your direct deposit so you can run with your files electronically. And also we will cover some setup options in HR for attendance, some skills, and orientation as well. The first area I'd like to start with is the organization and posting setup. This is a very important part of the payroll setup. We will cover the payroll posting accounts. This is very important because it's going to show you how to set up your posting accounts that will flow over into general ledger when you're posting your payroll. Department and position are required because those are how our GL org structure goes and how we post over into general ledger. Also, we will talk about the payroll preferences and the HR preferences. With that, we'll go ahead and look at Dynamics GP. I'm on GP 2013, and I'm also in the Fabricam company using the sample data. This is my home page. Because we're going to focus a lot today on Human Resources and Payroll, I will just go right into the HR and Payroll home page. What's nice about this is I try to organize everything that's going to be one click away as we go through our items. I've also customized my toolbar a little bit up here at the top so I can have easy access for my to-do items such as running payroll. So let's first look at whenever we think of things we need to do in setup, there's a payroll setup and an HR setup. So under setup, we'll go into payroll setup. This is probably the first window you'll want to go into when you focus on your payroll setup. We do have auto-assign of your employee IDs, so if you want to auto-assign any of your employee ID information, you can do that. It's optional. Otherwise, you can have your own numbering system with that as well. Under the defaults, this is very important as it'll save you time when you process your payroll, so you can have a checkbook default for payroll and manual checks. Also, your check format. So if you are going to print checks, what is your default check format? Something new that we added to Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 is alignment forms. As of today, not many customers print alignment forms anymore, and that's what we defaulted to when you process payroll. So once you upgrade to 2013 or go live on 2013, make sure to check this as checks and earning statements, so no defaults will print. If I click on the multi-user button, this is important if you want to have a couple people running payroll at the same time. Maybe I run Department A and B, and Julie, payroll person, is running Department C and D. This is allowing us to process payroll a lot faster when we have many employees. If I click on the options, There's some important information in here. If we want our decimal places to be more than 2, I've set mine up as 2, but if we want to have, for some of those deductions and benefits, especially around life insurance, you may need to set this at 4 or 5 in the payroll setup. If we want to include our year-to-date amounts on our checks, this would be if I received a bonus or commission in January and we're now paying out our payroll in March, that we would want to show the year-to-date codes of that bonus and commission in March. So that's something that you probably want to mark in here. We also have tracking for days worked and weeks worked. We can edit financial fields, and this will be important when we get into FUTA and SUTA to change those different states. So you might want to mark your edit financial fields. And if you'd like to display your pay rate on your transaction when you're processing payroll, when you're keying information, I would encourage you to mark that as well. We have a couple user-defined fields up here at the top. These are important if you have a field that you'd like to track in your system that you're not seeing something we have. So we have user-defined fields. You can say, I've labeled mine as spouse, but you put your labels right in here, and they will be at your employee maintenance window. If I click on the classes, classes are very important as they're a roll-down feature. So if you have lots of pay codes, deductions, or benefits that you're going to roll down to your employees, you can use this class button. And you could set your classes up as grouping of employees. So if you want to create a full-time class or a part-time class, and I click on my codes, you can assign what codes you want assigned to the class. Then when I assign that class to my employees, that information will automatically default and roll down to them. So it's less assignment and windows that you're going into. So I'd recommend to set up your pay codes in the class. Probably your state and local taxes are very common. Class functionality is typically only on the payroll side. So if we're doing benefits and deductions in HR, I would not roll those down by the class because class is payroll only. So I would use it for your pay codes, your state tax, and your local tax to save you some keystrokes. Let's go into the human resource preferences. So this is under the Tools, Setup, System, and HR Preferences. This window is probably your setup of HR. Just as we covered payroll, we're now looking at the HR setup preferences. So if there's something you'd like to change in the HR system, you'd probably want to go into this preference window. We can auto-create the position pay code links, editing of attendance, maintenance, and earnings history. I have mine marked, but maybe after the setup, that's something you probably would not want to have marked because it allows editing capability. We do have reason for pay adjustments. So as I go through my windows today, you're going to notice a pop-up box for pay adjustments. If you want to enable that reason and cancel on those boxes, you'll want those flagged. Also, what's important down here on the left, I want to point out it's called employee filters. And what's nice about employee filters is I can filter out my employees by division and department. So if there's certain employees in a department that you don't want a user to see that does have access to payroll, you can rule them out by these filters. So it covers a lot of the HR windows and most of your pay code windows. It would not filter out anything on like a SUTA report or a 941 report, but it is nice for the employee information and your pay codes. I'd also like to point out your pay steps on the left. If you want to use pay steps, I don't have mine turned on today, but what's nice if you're in an organization where your employees automatically go up a pay step and grade. Sometimes that happens in the schools, union areas where I am just jumped up a pay step and grade based on my years of service. And that's what your pay schedules are used for. Now that we've covered the HR setup and the payroll setup, let's look a little bit at our posting. So if we go into Tools, Setup, Posting, and let's look at our payroll accounts. Mine look pretty simplistic to what a normal customer's would look like. So these are going to be what posts over into General Ledger. So we have to have our default all accounts, but what normally you would do is differentiate yours by department, position, and pay code. And then what GL account do I want that go to? So if I work in department, admin, in the position of, let's look here, in the accounting clerk, what GL account do I want? So yours will be very massive, and we can import into this as well. But what we want to make sure is we always have the all, because if I don't have that and I'm running payroll and I don't have it divvied out for a department position, then we will get an error on the calculate report. So it's very important to have an all at the bottom of each of these categories. So you can see here's where my federal tax is. These are defaults going into general ledger accounts. My local taxes, deductions, here's my benefit expense type items. So each one of these will have to be mapped out to what your organization is and your GL structure. If you add a department and position, then you'll want to make sure to come into this window and add your GL posting accounts as well. Otherwise, we'll see issues when we post our payroll to general ledger. Let's also go under Tools, Setup, Posting, and Posting. This is also a very important window when we're running payroll. If we choose Series of Payroll and Computer Checks, and I'll just expand this, there's a few things I want to cover in this window. So here are all our posting registers when we go to General Ledger. We can choose to post to General Ledger. That means when I post my payroll, it will post to General Ledger in a batch, or we can choose to post through to General Ledger, and that would skip the batch and post right to your GL accounts, however you would like to set that up. We have many posting registers that print when we post our payroll. So you can choose which ones you want them to print. Maybe you want to save them right to a file. Not as many customers print all our posting journals as they did back in the day. And what's nice is under Reports, Payroll, Reprint Journals, you can reprint your journals at any time. So it's probably not necessary for you unless you want to print your posting journals as you have in the past. I also want to point out on this window the benefit registers. You can see we have two, one that's benefit register and one that has a PPR at the end. And what that is print before posting. So we have a lot of customers that would like to see their posting accounts before you post payroll and maybe fix some errors in the general ledger accounting. So what's important is if you'd like to see some of these reports prior to posting payroll, you're going to want to mark the print before posting. So when we go through our payroll process today, I will show you an example of that. New to GP 2013 is this build check file exception, and I would encourage you to mark that. And what we heard from customers was, I would like a report that would just show me my errors and my warnings when I'm processing payroll. Right now we cut out probably a 30-page report, and you have to go through each one to find your errors and your warnings. So with this build check file exception marked, it will just kick out the errors and warnings. You're probably down to a page, and it will make you process a payroll much faster. So I would encourage you to mark the build check file exception and look at that report. I also have my check posting register marked. That's a typical one because it shows all my general ledger accounts. I also marked the pre-posting for that so you can see it before we process payroll and fix any general ledger accounts. So you'll want to mark and unmark which ones you would like to pop up. And again, the PPR is pre-posting reports. Most of them are duplicated in this window. Another thing we added to GP 2013 for requests from customers is DIA. When I talk about DIA, that is called deduction in arrears. And we used to throw a deduction in arrears report at the time of build and calculate, which many customers did not feel was useful. So what we did in GP 2013 is we added this option in this posting setup to unflag that report. So if it's a report that you really don't see useful, I would go in here and unmark that option. If I scroll down a little bit, another thing I want to point out that we added to GP 2013 was a duplicate report. I think it's more down at the bottom. UPR duplicate checks. And I would encourage you to mark that option for GP 2013. So what that is allowing you to do is warn you if you're going to print duplicate checks. We don't want duplicate checks in the system because when we try to void, if it's a duplicate check number, nothing will appear in the void window. So what we'd like to do is warn you that you're going to print or post a duplicate check. And what we're doing is we're looking through your check history, and also if myself and another user are processing payroll, we're looking in the work tables for any duplicate checks. So I would encourage you to mark that one as well. Next, what we'll cover is items on our taxes. I will show you how to install the tax update. We'll also talk about local taxes, state taxes, and then cover the unemployment setup as well. So we have a system that automatically has our tax updates loaded on a server ready for you. So you typically in a year release 7 to 8 tax tables depending on what type of year it is. We give you all the federal tax tables, your FICA tax tables, and state tax tables. So quite a bit of that information. If we just want to install the tax tables, you just go to Maintenance, U.S. Payroll Updates, and check for tax updates. It will have you log in and put your authorized number in there because we want to make sure that you are authorized on your enhancement plan to receive our tax updates, and then it will install your tax tables. Once your tax tables are installed, you can go to Tools, Setup, System, Payroll Tax. I'd like to show you some of these tax tables. So once the tax table is installed, your last tax update right here will be updated. So if you review any of our documentation, you know that we always have a last tax update date that we're incrementing. If we look in here, our tax tables are editable. If you want to change them on the fly, you may do so. Whenever you install the tax update, this will just overwrite anything you edited. So if I go down, I'm going to show you, we have employer, FICA, Medicare and Social Security, and employee. So when rates change from 4.2 to 6.2, we have this all loaded in our table, and it's very easy for you to use. I'll go ahead and show you both, first the employer FICA. So you can pull up your code, EFICM. This tells you what we're doing. If we click on Filing Status, I arrow over, and if I click on Tables, you can see there's the 1.45 rate for your employer Medicare. If I go back, when they threw us for a loop and added the employee Medicare, so if I make over $200,000 in a year, I have to pay extra Medicare. So if I click on Filing Status, arrow over, click on my tables, you can see that at $200,000, I'm paying the $145 as an employee. If I go over that, I'm now paying the $235. So it's all held in our tax tables. At the beginning of the year, we'll usually release the 2015, for example, tax update at the end of December for 2014. What a customers usually like to do is go look and make sure the FICA limit is correct. So if I choose FICA S for FICA Social Security, click on Filing Status, arrow over, and I click on Tables, you can see right now we're at a 117 limit, and that changes typically every year and goes up. So it's something nice that customers like to do is to go in to make sure the tax tables are installed correctly. They can look at this FICA S code. You can also see in the tax code window I have all my states loaded. We typically do all the states we can on the round 1, and then we'll release round 2 for any states that have tax updates later. Each one will have a sequence that it's doing. Every state is different. And then we may have different filing statuses for each state, and the tables are loaded. So everyone's a little bit different when it gets into the states. The local taxes are not provided by the system. If I go into Setup and we go down here to Local Taxes, we do not provide the local taxes, but you can set them up. So if you want to set up a local tax code, you can set that up. If you want to do California SDI, you can just type in that SDI code, put in your sequence, check for your maximums, and that one's just a flat tax rate. So many customers, if they have 1 or 2 local taxes, they just set them up in the local tax setup window. Another tax window I'd like to look at is the unemployment. So if we go into the unemployment window, what this is important for is for our maximums. So if I click on Georgia, we'll look at it has a wage limit of $8,500, and you put in your unemployment tax ID in this window and then your tax rate. If Georgia does flip to a different tax rate, that is not held in our tax table. So it's your responsibility as a customer to go in here and change your wage limit and your tax rate. This window is also important when we get into our FUTA and SUTA reporting. So if you want to include previous state wages on your SUTA report, you will want that marked. And then also the tax sheltered annuities. So if we want to insert tax sheltered annuities, TSAs, to be included as taxable wages on the SUTA report, you would need to do that for each state in this window. One other note about tax updates I want to encourage you, and you'll see it in the slide deck, is that we have an automatic email that goes out that's called Insights. And so if you're wondering when a tax update is released or what changes are coming out, I provided the link to Insights, and that is something you can sign up as a customer, a free email notifying you of all tax updates and year-end updates that have been released, as well as any other pertinent information that's releasing on Microsoft Dynamics GP. Now we'll get into some of the code setup. So we'll talk about setup of pay codes, deductions, benefits, all the different things we need to set up. We'll also talk about garnishments to get you up and running for your payroll process. So I'll go down here in the setup area and we'll focus on some of these setup codes right along here. So I'll first go into department. So department is required field because if we remember, our posting accounts over to general ledger are for our departments. So you'll want to set up all your departments that you want to track over into general ledger. We have a code and then a description. What's nice, when I go into my employee maintenance window, I can determine, if I just use Ackerman, I have my descriptions printing or showing on my employee maintenance. So you can choose to have your code or your description on the employee maintenance window. Then you don't have to memorize all the codes. If I click on position and drill back, this is all my positions that I will have set up in human resources and payroll. So we talked about departments and positions, and you can see those fields were red. That means that they are required to enter your employee because, again, our posting accounts go over into departments and positions. So I have a position code, just like department, and my description. We have our employee or EEO classes. Human Resources prints all the EEO reports, so we can mark our EEO class, our FLSA status, and reports to position. So that's some information around our position information. We can also track training on the position. So I can assign training or courses to my position, so when my employee is in that position, those training courses will be required. Let's go ahead and look at some of the pay code information. So pay codes are what we pay our employees with, so they're very important when we're running payroll. And I'll just go ahead and pull up my salary code. So you can name your codes whatever you want, departments, positions, and pay codes, name them whatever you want. But what's important on the pay codes is the pay type. So I'm going to clear that, and let's just talk about these different pay types, because that is going to tell us in the system how to process the payroll. So if we look at the hourly pay type, that would be you would name your code whatever you want and put it as an hourly pay type if you're going to put your hours in for your employees. If I choose the salary option, when you have salary, that means that those employees are paid the same typically all the time. You would not have to enter transactions for those employees. So you would create a salary pay code with a salary pay type, and the only transactions you enter are for your exception time of vacation and sick. Piecework, if you're in an organization that pays your employees by the piece or the job or the piece that they make, that would be a piecework pay type pay code. Commission that would be more of an other amount, or I'm going to pay Terry $250 of commission. Also, the commission pay code pay type is another one that only allows you to enter negatives. So if you are doing some type of, you give them $1,000 commission, but then you end up taking some of that back, this commission pay type allows negatives. Business expense is very important, as the business expense pay type is when we're paying back our employees, such as mileage, reimbursing them for expenses. And it does not get reported as wages. So if ever you need to pay your employee and you don't want it reported in their gross, use the business expense pay type. That's very important because it's a common mistake a lot of customers make. So when we don't want it included in gross or wages, use the business expense pay type. Overtime would be any overtime hours, double time. The vacation and sick pay types are used for my exception time. Holiday is holiday. Pension is important if we're doing anything around the 1099-R. So if you have employees that need to print a 1099-R at the end of the year instead of your W-2s, then you're going to want to set them up with a pension pay code pay type, because that is what's going to populate your 1099-R at the end of the year. And then other is used a lot for your bonuses. It's just an amount field. So I pay Terry $50 or $60. Use it for anything. And again, you name your pay codes whatever you want. You can see I have some listed here. And it's your pay type that's what's going to drive what happens in the system. If I pull up a vacation one that I have, you can see that vacation is then going to be based on your hourly or salary pay code and has a pay rate. We have units of pay. The pay period is important, especially around taxing. So if you, when we get into taxes, we annualize all our taxes. So it's, pay period is important when we get into deductions and benefits as well. Here's where you mark it as subject to taxes. So if your pay is subject to federal tax, FICA, Social Security, state, FUTA, SUTA, this is where you would mark all this. And this is the setup window, and it'll all roll down to your employees based on this setup. We also have capability for flat taxing as well if you want to do flat taxes on bonuses or commissions. We talked about employee class earlier, and that's where we can roll down different things based on the class. If we look at workers' comp, we do track workers' comp. We have FUTA, SUTA, and workers' comp reports. So you can set up your different workers' comp codes by the state. We have the straight pay rate and the overtime pay rate options. You put in your tax percent and the wage limit. Again, these are not supplied by our tax tables. And the last thing I cover is your shift code setup. When we get into shift codes, if we have an hourly employee, maybe a nurse, and they have shift codes for working night shift, then you can choose a shift code of night shift and enter in the shift differential. Next, what I would like to get into is your benefits and deductions for human resources and payroll. So when you're setting up benefits and deductions, there's a benefit window and a deduction window in payroll, but it's also combined in HR as one window. So what I'm going to do today is start in the HR window, which is then going to split out into a deduction or a benefit into payroll. So if we go down into our setup, HR, and benefits and deductions. There are 4 different types of benefits and deductions. So we have the health insurance, life insurance, retirement plan, and if the code does not split up into one of those 3, I would call it a miscellaneous benefit. So if we go into health insurance, and I'll pull up one of the examples I have here, I have insurance. So each one of these windows is going to split out into a benefit and deduction. So you can see my contribution here for employee is $47.95 and my employer is 0. So this is a deduction only plan. So I'll go ahead and I'll create a family plan. Again, it's important to get our frequencies. Usually what we would recommend is your frequencies to be the same as what your pay period cycle is, because we are annualizing all our deductions and benefits based off this frequency. The red fields are my required fields, so I'll go ahead and fill in a coverage there. So if I say my employee contribution for family is $100 and my employer is $50, this is going to be a $100 deduction and a $50 benefit on the payroll side. If I click on Save, it'll prompt you, do you want to set those up in payroll? And it brings me right into my deduction setup. So now we're on the payroll side. So my family plan comes over. What is going to be my start date? I'll just put that right in there. It's a fixed amount deduction at $100. We have maximums as well. You can also base it on certain pay codes. So if you want something that's only based when I get paid out commission, you can do that as well. And then here's your tax sheltering. So you can choose, is it sheltered from federal, FICA, Medicare? In GP 2013, it used to just say FICA. We split that out to FICA Social Security and FICA Medicare. So if you have a deduction that's sheltered from one but not the other, then you can mark that in here. And state and local. Another thing that's important is allowing of arrears, which we will get into deduction and arrears later when we look at our employee setup. But if you want this to be kept track of arrears, if you have employees that don't make enough money, I would encourage you to mark that. Now it's bringing me into my benefits setup window of my $50. I'll go ahead and put a start date on that as well. And here is where you say it's subject to tax. So if you want to flag it as taxable as a benefit, you would mark that. What's also important on both the deduction and benefit is your W-2 box and label. So you can choose, especially with insurance now, they want that on the W-2, so you can put in box 12DD and have that information reportable on their W-2s. A couple things about benefits that I want to show you. If you're a human resources and payroll user, when you set those users up in the system under Tools, Setup, System User. I'm logged in today as user SA. You will want to make sure they have marked Payroll View for Human Resources. And that would be for any of your users that are going to be entering data for human resources and payroll. What this option does is it allows you to go over into payroll for your benefits and deductions. And if we don't have that flagged, then we won't be able to go over into the payroll side. So it's very important, and it's a step sometimes missed by users when they're setting them up. Another thing under the setup I wanted to talk about for benefits and deductions is the benefit preferences. So Human Resources has its own to-do list, which it'll prompt you to things to add to the to-do list, kind of like Outlook reminders. So if someone goes on FMLA leave, do we want that to go to the to-do list? And a lot of this is in the benefit preferences window. So if you want to post things, you can ask each time. We have the FMLA calendar set up. And also an option for benefit preferences. You saw when I set up the benefit, it brought me into the payroll windows. Some customers don't like that, and they just want to save it in HR and not prompt over into payroll. So you can mark the box to automatically save into payroll. And it's just an option based on the user in your setup that you'll want to mark or unmark, however you prefer to see that happen. Next, we'll talk about setting up of direct deposit. This is a very important part of payroll, and many of the customers use direct deposit so they can automatically send their checks right to the bank in an ACH file that's NACHA formatted and print earnings statements. So today we'll cover some of the setup around direct deposit. Direct deposit is actually very easy to set up, and once it's set up and you have all your bank information entered, it typically doesn't change unless you're going to change banks. So that's one nice thing about direct deposit. It does not require much setup. So under my setup, I'll go ahead and click on direct deposit. You can see I have it active. There are two options. You can print separate from checks or print as voided checks. I'd say most customers today are printing separate from checks. We print a really nice earnings statement with that you can print on blank paper. If you click as voided checks, then you're printing on your check stock and wasting check stock. So it's up to you if you want to print your people that are on direct deposit as a voided check, or do you just want them to print as an earnings statement? We give them the earnings statement number, the pre-note count. I would mark to check for exceptions, so if I don't have enough funds, I would mark those as well. And we can choose to update bank rec. And do we want to update bank rec in one individual amount or, I'm sorry, an individual per employee or a total amount? A lot of customers do one total amount. If we do individual, you're going to see each direct deposit employee post over into bank rec. The headers and footers and links really shouldn't have to be used for a notcha formatted file. 99.9% of the banks are notcha format. So all you need to really determine with your bank is if they want you to include the auto settle line or not. That's the balancing credit debit at the bottom of your file. If the bank does not require that, you would not want it marked. So you'd want to put in your company identification number, the origin. These are all numbers and the names go over here. The ones again in red are required. And then I would recommend to mark increment your ACH file name so you don't overwrite that, and then save it to a location you want, and that's the file we create and then send to the bank. So I would increment it if you keep the files out there, and so we don't overwrite last week's or somebody else's file. Every time you post a payroll, it will create a file out there, or it will create a build out there, and then we would go into the Generate ACH window and mark them all. What we'd want to do is once we have this set up, we can go into the Generate ACH window and under the Transactions, Generate ACH, and what you do is create a pre-note file. So then you can send that file to your bank, and once you send that file to your bank, they're kind of looking over all the account numbers and make sure you have it set up correctly. So I would recommend to create a pre-noted file right here. One other area of setup, if we're using the auto settle line, is under Cards, Financial, and Checkbook. We'll go over here. Cards, Financial, Checkbook. You would want to pull up your payroll checkbook that you have, and you can click on Direct Deposit. So there's a bank account information in here as well. If we're using auto settle line, the bank ID then gets in to be required as well, and the transit and bank down here. So those are the areas of direct deposit, not very difficult, and then sending the pre-note file to the bank is most important to make sure we have it all set up correctly. Let's go into HR setup for a little bit and talk about attendance. So what attendance is it's a way to accrue your vacation and sick time. Payroll has a very vanilla 2-bucket type vacation sick accrual, but attendance goes into a little more detail, and it allows you to have maximums. We have some different reporting, inquiry windows, and it allows you to have more buckets. So if you're a customer that needs vacation, sick, float, maybe bereavement balances printing on your check, if you have more than 2, then I would recommend you to accrue in HR attendance. So let's cover some of the attendance setup within Microsoft Dynamics. So if I go down to the setup area, under HR, attendance. So you can choose to accrue in HR and payroll. So if I click on the setup, I have mine set to accrue in human resources. I can enter that time in payroll, so I want that marked. What is my seniority based on? So it has a nice accrual schedule that's basing it on months or days. So most typically they do months. And here are my options of when I am sick or on vacation that I can put in these reasons. So if you want to add more than what's there by default, you may. So we have accrual periods that we'll want to set up. So I'd recommend, what we typically recommend in support is to set up a year prior, the current year, and a year ahead. So then if you're accruing at the end of the year, you have that year ahead and you won't get any type of error messages, and we would do the accrual. So we say a year prior, the current year, and a year ahead of your accrual schedules. And if you are weekly and biweekly, you would need to set up both of those. Let's first look at a schedule I have created. So I have, you name these schedules whatever you want. So what you typically do is create a schedule based off your employee handbook. So I would probably have multiple levels, working from 0 to 1 year, 2 years to 5 years, and my different accruals. So you would have a schedule that you would assign to your employee, and in that schedule, you have the different accruals. And so based on my hire date, I would automatically bump up to the next accrual schedule. The system would handle that for you. If I drill back on accrual, you can look, I'll pull this one up I have vacation. So you would create as many accruals as you have for your bump ups to attach to your schedule. So you'd look also at your different employee groups, and so if the president of the company has a different accrual schedule than a typical full-time employee, they would have their own accrual schedule. So if I click on vacation, I just set it up as a pay period. We have 4 different type of accruals. You can post once. Interval would be if I'm accruing every 30 days or every 60 days, as an example. Hours worked accruals or pay period accruals are the most common. I can say number of hours to accrue, put that in there. And then we have 2 types of maximums. We can have a maximum of number of hours I can accrue in a year, and then you can have maximums on your available balance. So there's 2 maximums, so I can stop at any time. If I have a maximum of 100 hours that I can accrue, and maybe I allow a little carryover if we put 240 in here, then I can, anytime I have available balance of over 240, it's going to stop accruing on me. So 2 different stoppages on maximums to remember, and then my accrual period. So you create as many accruals as you needed and attach them to your schedule, and then create as many schedules as you have of employees of different accruals. Once you have that set up, then we assign to employees. The next step is your time codes. So we talked about pay codes on the payroll side. In HR, we have time codes, and it's a 1-to-1 link. So you can see here I've created a vacation time code that is linked to my vacation pay code. So whenever I key in a time code of 8 hours of vacation, it's going to update my payroll, link to my payroll code, and pay me out 8 hours and reduce my time by 8 hours of vacation. So the time types are benefit. If I clear this, I can also look down here, and you can track like absent time as well. So if you want to track, an employee's tardiness, or maybe you want to track just bereavement time, you can create another time code that's just tracking bereavement, but I don't want those to print on my check. So you can track all sorts of time and then determine which ones you want to print on your check or not. A couple other setup options I want to cover in HR. We talked about benefits and deductions. I want to talk about extra fields down here, as they're very common when we get into setting up of HR and payroll. Some companies may look across all our windows and say, well, I still need this type of field for tracking and I don't see it in the system. And that's when we'd want to look at extra fields. A lot of customers use extra fields, especially around the employee. So if I click on the employee, I have set up some extra fields in this window, and I have them labeled. So what's nice is you don't need to be familiar with the code or anything. You can just go into the setup and put your extra fields in this window. And now if I go over here just to show you on my employee in Ackerman, and under the HR button, extra fields, those extra fields are now listed right here to track your information. So if it's something you want to use or track on your employee that we don't have a field for, you can put the label right on there and start tracking it with extra fields. So we have extra fields for applicants, employee, company, division, department, and position. Another thing for the setup is the orientation. So we have what's called orientation and termination checklists, which are nice. So if you go ahead and click on that, you can see I have some full-time start time. What's nice about these orientation lists, it's user definable, and you create your list, and you would assign it to your employees as a guide to what has been done for setting them up of HR and payroll. So there's a nice for orientation and then for termination. So to make sure we're not missing any types of those steps, we can create these guides and assign them to our employees. Couple more setups down here that I'd like to show you are the reviews. So we do have a review system in here, and you would set up your review names and name them what you want. So you can see in here I have a manager review. You determine the review intervals. It's pretty simplistic, but it is a nice window. And then you assign those reviews to your employees. So you can use them as a review, or if it's a new hire employee and you want to have some new hire guidelines that they need to meet, you could create those in the review window as well. What's nice about the reviews is they post to the to-do list, and you could create reminders on that, or a smart list that would remind you who's has things to do in the next 30 to 60 days, and then tell the managers or the supervisors of that. So a lot of customers use the reviews, and then we create our next review date based on hire date, date of last review, or adjusted hire date. One other item I'd like to point out down here is your skills. And skills, you can see I've created some skills here. If you're in a position where you need to track who an applicant or an employee that has some type of skill, you could, or if, let's say I'm going to go on site, and in order for me to go on site, I need to have this type of skill. So we could query our applicants or employees to see who's mastered that skill, and then it would give me a nice list of who I could send on site. So use it how you wish, but it is kind of nice to have that querying capability with your different skills. If it's a test that I've completed or some type of skill that I can drive, some type of equipment, you can see I'm using a SQL skill here. So what we learned today in Module 1 around the HR and payroll setup is how to install our tax tables and use them properly, how to set up the HR attendance and track the vacation sick information. We also covered direct deposit and how to set up that information and send our files electronically to the bank. We also had insight into your pay codes, your deductions, your benefits side on both the HR and payroll setup. And then we covered the payroll posting accounts and how to determine how to set those up and make sure our departments and positions are set up properly.